Today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite one and done eyeshadows, and I am particularly excited about today's video because it is my first time doing a collab here on YouTube, and it's with my friends Bat to the Brow and Glam Smitty, aka Millie and Smitha respectively, and I am super excited to go check out their videos because I am very curious to see if we have any overlapping shades, and you should also go check out their videos, so I will link them in the description box. Also, hi, my name is Noopur and I love indie makeup and all things color and sparkle, and welcome back to my channel. If you aren't already subscribed, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like and commenting down below. I would love to know what your favorite one and done eyeshadows are because I feel like everyone views this category a little differently and has different requirements for what makes a good one and done shadow, so I'm curious to know what are yours. For my choices, I mostly wanted to focus on some single shadows from indie makeup brands that I really love, but I also wanted to include a couple of potted and compact options, so I'll talk about these two towards the end, but I'm going to start with the single shadows. And the potted compact options are a bit more on the neutral side, but for the single shadows, I wanted to focus on mostly colorful options because I have a lot of one and done spicy neutral shadows, which if you know, you know, Seeking Shifts created that term. But I want to do a video with just those spicy neutral options. So for this video, I didn't want there to be any overlap, which is why I focused on some more colorful options for the true single shadows. And I have actually a lot more potted / compact true neutral single shadows that are mostly one and done, so if you want a video on that, let me know and I can definitely do that. Before we get started, I want to briefly talk about what my criteria for one and done eyeshadows is, and obviously these are specific to my tastes and preferences, and they aren't absolutes. There are a couple of exceptions even in this roundup to these rules, but generally this is what I look for. So typically what I like to do is blend my one and dones into my crease and feather them out into nothing, so you can't really see where it starts or ends. And there are a couple of things that I look for in eyeshadow to make sure that that is possible. Firstly, in terms of the base color and where most of the pigment is in the eyeshadow, I look for something that has a sheer mid-toned base. And the reason that I don't want something opaque or too dark is that those are typically really hard to blend out on their own without the assistance of some mattes, and it'll make it really hard for me to feather into the crease and into nothing. But if the base is too sheer or too light, then there's not going to be enough dimension and definition, which I really need, especially on my eye shape. I feel like my eyelids are really large, and everyone always tells me that that's a good thing, but I feel like I need some dimension and definition there to make them really stand out, if that makes sense. Then in terms of texture, I like to look for a shadow that's a bit more on the smooth side. And some of these shadows that I'm going to talk about today do have a little bit of texture, but none of them are outright flaky, because I find that with flaky shadows, what happens is when I'm trying to blend them out into my crease, they can go a little patchy, and also they are more prone to fallout. So I look for something that's a bit more on the smooth side. And then the fallout thing brings me to my next point, which is that I don't like to use a glitter glue or a tacky primer underneath one and done eyeshadows because once again, it makes it hard to blend the eyeshadow out into the crease and feather it out into nothing. I also quickly want to mention my application technique with one and done eyeshadows because I think that that's really important here too. And especially because I don't use a glitter primer. So I usually just have regular eye primer on, and what I'll do is I'll first go in with my finger for maximum pigment. And the reason I really need to use my finger is because especially with sheer based eyeshadows, I find that if you apply them with a brush, the base pigment is not as visible, and so tapping it on with my finger really allows that base pigment to latch onto the eyeshadow primer. And then after that, rather than using a traditional blending brush, I will use something like this brush. This is from What's Up Beauty. It's the R106 brush, and it doesn't have to be this exact one, but anything with that's a flat shader brush with a little bit of fluff to it is key, because using something like this allows me to just tap out the edges and then even use the fluffy side to kind of blend it into the crease. But using a true blending brush, I feel sometimes leads to more fallout. Two more notes before we get into the video. The first one is that some of these eyeshadows I did receive in PR, so I will note that both on the screen as well as in the description box along with any codes that I have. And then the second thing that I want to talk about is how I do my swatches. So what I do is I will do an opaque swatch at the top of my hand and a sheer swatch at the bottom, and then when I'm wiggling my hand back and forth in front of the camera like this, I will give you both an in-focus shot and an out-of-focus shot just so you can get a really well-rounded idea of what the eyeshadow looks like. This is Glaminatrix Bloodstone. This has a reddish brown base with sparkles that shift vibrant green, blue, indigo, and even purple at a sharp angle. It is super sparkly and has a creamy but not emollient formula. The sparkles are a medium particle size and there is some texture, but it smooths out easily. Bloodstone is one of the first eyeshadows I wanted to include in this roundup because it is just so special. The second I saw Glaminatrix teasing this eyeshadow, I knew I needed to purchase it because I hadn't seen anything like it, especially at the time. And even now, I think I only have one shadow that's like kind of similar to it, but it's not exact. I swatched it over here and you can see just how impactful this shade is, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to include it, because not only is the shift super vibrant, it's also the contrast with the base. When I tilt it away from the light, you can see that the base is this reddish brown, and one of my favorite things in makeup is combining warm and cool tones together, makeup with contrast, and that's what makes this eyeshadow so special, because I have seen this, green to blue to indigo shift a few times now in the indie makeup world, but putting it over this base is what makes this shadow so special. And then the other reason that I think it's so impactful is I've noticed this with Glaminatrix, their more recent eyeshadows, they are very foiled and metallic when you build them up. Like, this is a pretty thick swatch, or if you put it over glitter glue, it'll give you that really reflective finish. But if you sheer it out and just tap it on, it gives you this sparse, twinkly, diffused effect that's equally as beautiful and still quite impactful. This is Terra Moon's Gemini. It has a muted grayish purple base and shifts fiery pink, orange, gold, and green at the harshest angle. This one is not that sparkly and has more of a sheen or luminous glow. It's also UV light reactive. The particle size is very small and it's very soft in the pan. Gemini is one of the least sparkly shades in this roundup. It's one of the least sparkly shades. I wouldn't say it's the only one that's more of this. It's not quite a satin, but it's more sheeny, more glowy, and I actually think that that is what makes it really good as a one-and-done eyeshadow. I've swatched it right here, and you can see, especially compared to Bloodstone, it's just not as reflective or shiny, but that makes it so easy to diffuse out into the crease. And for this one, I actually have used a regular blending brush to blend it out, and it works really well because the base is actually quite pigmented compared to some of these other shades, and so using a true blending brush helps blend that pigment out. And much like with Bloodstone, this also has that contrast between like a smoky purple base and this glowy pinky orange shimmer that I really love in eyeshadow. This shade is also UV reactive, and I feel like in most settings where you would have a black light, it's going to be a very dark space. There's not going to be a lot of light. Like, forget about low light. You're not going to be able to really see sparkle at all, and so I think this would make a really good one-and-done option for any blacklight parties you folks may be going to. This is Touch of Glam Bloodhound. This one has a semi-sheer, warm pinky red base with sparkles that shift teal, blue, and purpley pink. This shadow has some texture to it, but can be smoothed out. The sparkles have almost a slightly diffused quality to them. It is pretty creamy, but not emollient. You want to make sure not to layer too much of this one, or it can get thick. Bloodhound is what I'm wearing today, and I'll pop up a clip so you can see my eyeshadow up close. You can see all the colors and the texture and the sparkle, especially because this clip is in different lighting, so it really shows off the sparkle. I swatched it over here next to Bloodstone, and I love that these two have similar names and kind of look similar. They're not exactly the same because Bloodhound has more of a teal blue reflex straight on versus Bloodstone that is way more green, and also the bases are slightly different. I would say that Bloodstone has less of a pigmented base than Bloodhound, but I really like how pigmented the base is in Bloodhound, and that's what makes it such a special one-and-done shadow. I feel like this type of shift is pretty common at this point. There are a lot of shadows that shift from this like tealy green blue to a purple, but I don't know what it is about this specific shadow. It is the most impactful version that I have, and I have a lot of shadows in this particular colorway. This shadow is actually one of the slightly textured shades out of the bunch here, but I am wearing it today, and this is my first time wearing it as a one and done. Actually, I had been wanting to wear it as a one and done after previously wearing it with mattes, and I was like, let me just experiment and see, and if it worked, then I'll include it in the video, and thank God it worked because it is so beautiful. I didn't have any issue with the texture blending it out. I used that brush that I talked about in the beginning, and it worked perfectly. This is Sinful Echo's Ember. This one has a pigmented fiery orange base and sparkles that shift from gold to green and even teal at the sharpest angle. It's very smooth and has a small particle size, but it's still surprisingly sparkly. The formula is neither too dry or creamy, very middle of the road. I also want to note that this is now sold in a circle pan instead of a square. Here's Ember, and I had to include at least one truly warm toned option because I feel like, I don't know, I know that warm tones are more popular in the mainstream and cool tones I feel like get talked about more in indie makeup spaces, but I still do have a soft spot in my heart for warm tones and especially gold shades that are this vibrant and yellow gold. I've swatched it here and you can see that the gold shift is very yellow, and I've previously talked about how I'm picky about my golds because I don't like it when golds lean more neutral, specifically in colorful shades, because at that point they just kind of blend into my complexion and they're not really giving anything, at least on me, and with my preferences. And I really want the golds to be super saturated. And I feel like this yellow, it's gorgeous. It really stands out against my skin tone, especially when it shifts to a green and paired with that vibrant orange base. And it'll be perfect for the warmer months coming up because I feel like that's when I tend to gravitate towards colors like this. They just remind me of like a warm, sunny summer day, and especially during the hot months. I don't know about you, but I tend to wear less base makeup and I want to do quicker eye looks, and one and done shadows are perfect for the summertime. This one is more on the smooth and shiny side, and that's not to say that it doesn't have any sparkle to it, but I feel like something about the texture of this eyeshadow gives it a very refined finish to the eyes, and that's what makes it really, really pretty as a one and done. This is Clionadh Royal Pear. It's part of the Earth Vibrant line. This has a somewhat muted lime green base with pearly pink peach gold shifts, and it also shifts to a vibrant lime at the harshest angle. This has the classic refined Clionadh formula, a small particle size and a formula that is balanced between dry and creamy. It has some sparkle but isn't as sparkly as some of their other shades. Here's Royal Pear, which kind of continues in the warm toned category slightly because the base is this beautiful lime green, but then the shift on this is what makes it really unique. You can see over here that the base is quite pigmented and it's not as sheer as some of these other shades, but it isn't difficult to blend out. I have worn this as a one and done at least 2 times, and both of those times that I did, it was very easy to blend out the edges, and this is in Clionahd's really smooth and fine particle size formula, which makes it more of a sheen. And it's not that it doesn't have any sparkle, but it's just got that refined Clionadh finish to it. And then I was saying that the shift is what makes this special, and what I mean by that is that it has kind of like a standard pink to gold shift, but the pink in it is far more desaturated and cool toned than other shades that I have that are similar to this. And nothing that I have is identical to the tones in this specific shade. This is also a shade that I always associate with spring, and now that I've had this for a couple of years, I do find myself reaching for it every time March rolls around because I just have to. This is Clionadh Myrrh. It's part of the electric line, but is classified as a duochrome. The base is an acid chartreuse and it shifts from bright cobalt to ultraviolet. This one is extremely smooth and has a very fine particle size. It's not the most sparkly shade, but the trade-off is that it has an electric glow. The formula is a touch dry. Myrrh is another iconic Clionadh shade. When this was first revealed and shown in swatches, people lost their damn minds. And I'm not surprised because it is quite a special eyeshadow. I've done a pretty thick swatch here so that you can see that the base is kind of this chartreuse green, and when you build it up, it is pretty vibrant, but when you shear the shadow out, that base almost vanishes, at least on my skin tone. And I think that's because I have pretty strong olive undertones, so I'm actually able to use this as an inner corner shade if I use it with a light hand, and you can't really see the base. But as a one and done, if I build this up over my lid, it is just the coolest effect. It's quite smooth and not as sparkly, which has to do with this specific kind of blue pigment. I'm pretty sure any shade that you see that has this vibrant ultraviolet shift and very blue straight on, you'll notice they're all more sheeny, shiny than sparkly. And that's not to say that there isn't any sparkle here. It's just, it's very fine and not as high impact as other sparkly shades. But I think that that makes for a super cool effect on the eyes, especially as a one and done, because when you put it over, it's like your eyeballs are glowing. It's definitely a statement shade. This is Clionadh Royal Peach. It's part of the Earth Vibrant line. This one has a sheer warm neutral base and shifts pink, orange, and yellow gold. It has a medium small particle size and is pretty sparkly for the texture, especially compared to the other two Clionadh shades that I mentioned in this video. My final Clionadh recommendation is Royal Peach, which is also another warm toned eyeshadow, but I think this one might be a little less intimidating than something like Ember. It's swatched over here, and the reason that I think that it's going to be less intimidating than something like Ember is that, first of all, the shift straight on is actually more of a pink, and the base is this sheer tan, almost orange, but it's not overtly orange, and most of the orange in the shift is only in the side shift versus with Ember, where I feel like the base itself is a very vibrant orange. And I know that that's a color that a lot of people are hesitant to wear, especially because of the associations with like 2016 makeup, but I think that this feels more wearable somehow than Ember. In terms of sparkle level, it's definitely more sparkly than Myrrh for sure, but it's also more sparkly than Royal Pear, which you would think that both of these being royal shades, Royal Pear, Royal Peach, that they would have something in common, but they really don't at all. They're not similar colors. They aren't the same amount of sparkle level. I actually don't know why they're both called Royal insert fruit name. And while of course this is a fantastic one and done, I also think that out of all of the colorful shades that I have listed here, this might be the one that's easiest to pair with neutral matte just because the base itself is so neutral. This is Pretties for Your Face Water Nymph. It has a pigmented but easy to sheer out blue base with sparkles that shift pink, orange, gold, and chartreuse. The chartreuse shift combines with the blue at an angle to make a secret green shift. This one has a medium particle size and some texture but smooths out really well. The formula is super sparkly and a touch on the dry side. Water Nymph is the last true single shadow that I have, and it is such a special one. I've swatched it over here, and I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but this does the whole warm, cool contrast thing that I really love with the vibrant blue base and then the pinky orangey shift on it. But there are a couple of other things that make this shadow special. There are other eyeshadows that could be considered as dupes to this shade, but I'm hesitant to use that word because they're not exactly the same. One of the eyeshadows is Terra Moon Stellar Apotheosis, which I feel like has a less pigmented base, which depending on your preferences, that could be a good thing. But for me, I wanted a slightly more pigmented base, so this one is better for my preferences. And then the other shadow that's similar to it is Shine by Estee's Takeover, which is pretty similar in terms of color and things like that, but texture-wise, that one's a bit more flaky, and like I mentioned before, I prefer shadows that smooth out easily for my one-and-dones. I also want to point out that this is it is the most affordable multichrome out of all the ones that I've listed here today because multichromes are expensive. This retails for $18 full price on the Pretties for Your Face website, but they frequently have 50% off sales that do include their multichromes, which they call Megachromes, I believe, and that brings it down to $9, which is a steal. This is Phytosurgence Defiant Dahlia. This is a cream shadow with a rich, medium deep brown base that has a pearlescent finish and also neutral shimmers scattered throughout. The neutral sparkles have a slow motion twinkle to them. The formula is a bit waxy and fully sets once it dries down. Defiant Dahlia is the only potted cream eyeshadow that I have in this roundup because I said before I wanted to mostly focus on colorful single shadows, but I wanted to include at least a couple more neutral options for people who prefer that. And out of all of my more bronzy shades, this one has my favorite tone. What makes this tone so unique, and I'm 90% certain this is what it is, but I'm pretty sure the owner of Phytosurgence, Jason, mentioned that there is a little bit of violet pigment in this, which keeps this from being like a traditional too warm orangey bronzy shadow, but it's also not cool toned. And I've never seen, or at least I don't own any bronze shadows that look like this. And the swatch really does not do it any justice. You have to get it on the eyes to see the magic of it. This is not the most sparkly shadow, and it doesn't claim to be. The base is more of a soft sheen, and then it has these sort of diffuse sparkles scattered throughout that aren't as, much of a obvious sparkle like these shadows have, and it's more of just like a diffused soft box finish, if that makes sense. And the effect that it has on the eyes is just so elegant and almost romantic. Like when I wear this, I feel so effortlessly beautiful, and It's definitely something that I wear in situations where maybe I don't want to go super colorful and loud, but I still want my eyeshadow to be special and pretty. I also just want to note that my specific eyeshadow, I think, is almost 2 years old at this point, so it's a little dried out, and if the swatch looks a little dull, that's probably why. Also, all the Phytosurgence cream shadows are a bit of a stiffer formula, which means that once they dry down and set down, they are budge proof. This is Joocyee D114 or Neon Light. This has a sheer light mauve base with a mix of neutral sparkles. There is also a small amount of tiny blue sparkles, but they are not super noticeable. This one has a dry and thin formula that is a bit hard pressed. It is super sparkly and very easy to sheer out. This Joocyee eyeshadow is my last recommendation, and I just really want to note that I love these compacts. They are so cool. They're clear and acrylic, which is kind of, you know, a little bit of like Urban Decay's moon dust shadows, but I love the irregular pan shape. I just think it's so cool. I've swatched it over here, and I have a couple other shades from Joocyee, and they're not all created equally. This one is actually my favorite, especially for a one and done, because of a couple specific things. First of all, I love that there is a contrast between the base and the sparkles, and it's not that warm, cool contrast that I always talk about, but the base is a bit of a mauvey shade, and then the sparkles are much more neutral, which I think just having a difference between the base shade and the sparkles is what makes for a lot of dimension, and I feel like that's a little rare in more mainstream shadows. Not that this is a mainstream shadow, because it's a Sea Beauty shadow. Actually, it's from a Chinese company, but I don't know. I love that it's such a wearable neutral shade, but it's still so special. The base is pretty sheer, and it does take a few layers to build it up to this pigment level. But then the other thing that I really love about it is no matter how much you build up the shadow, the sparkles on top never get too thick or opaque. You will still have a diffused layer of sparkles that just twinkle, and unless you use it over glitter glue, then you might be able to get it more opaque, but again, I don't use it over glitter glue, and I love how it twinkles. Here are all 10 eyeshadows swatched together. They are so beautiful. I wanted to show them side by side so you could get a sense of the color and texture and sparkle levels relative to each other. But that's it for this video. Let me know if you would like to see a separate video on all of my potted and single shadows that are in compacts, because a lot of those are neutral leaning and definitely qualify as one and dones, but I'm a little worried that the video could get a little repetitive just because they're all neutral, and I don't know, maybe I can get more descriptive, like talking about why I like them and get into the nitty gritty of it. But yeah, let me know if that sounds interesting, and I can definitely make that video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!